much for that reading, all right? So I'm going to introduce our next reader tonight, whose book launch it happens to be, and her books are over there on the table, and they're very beautiful, as was her first one. So Amber Elby was born in Grand Ledge, Michigan, but spent much of her childhood in the United Kingdom. She began writing when she was 3 years old and created miniature books by asking her family how to spell each and every word. Several years later, she saw her first Shakespearean comedy, Much Ado About Nothing, in London. Many years later, she studied creative writing at Michigan State University's Honors College before earning her Master's of Fine Arts degree in Screenwriting at the University of Texas at Austin. She lives in Texas with her husband and 2 daughters and spends her time teaching, traveling, and getting lost in imaginary worlds. Please welcome Amber.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming out. I want to say thanks to Nori for joining me, and a shout out to Brandy Harrison, who's sitting back there. She did my cover art, so she has not signed the books yet, but I'm volunteering you right now. I also want to say hi to some people who aren't here, but they're hopefully going to join me on the YouTube video. So hi to everyone at Buena Park High School, and also hi to all of my Twitter friends, the book bloggers, the bardflies, hi. And you all can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Amber Elby. You can also find me on my website. It's amberelby.com. So come and make friends with me online. I'm very active on social media. Before I talk about Double Double Toil, my new novel, I want to talk about Cauldron's Bubble. This is the second book in a 3-part series that is all based in the imaginary worlds of Shakespeare. So in this fantastical series, you won't see William Shakespeare as a character. You're going to see his characters interacting with each other across different plays and with characters that I have created myself. So it's very fast-paced. It was originally made for 13-year-old students who are just getting into Shakespeare in high school. It was meant to be a precursor. Before they'd read Macbeth or before they'd read Romeo and Juliet, they would read this, and then they'd go in with having a basic understanding of who the characters are. But what's happened with Cauldron's Bubble, at least, is my audience has expanded quite a bit to include adults who are already fans of Shakespeare. And that's because I embed different references, quotes, what they call on Twitter everyday shakes. So my characters will say things that are from the play. It's not going to be the same character who says it within the play. It's not going to be the same context, but it's in there as kind of an Easter egg for those of you who understand it. So Cauldron's Bubble was based on Macbeth, The Tempest, and Hamlet. So Hamlet's a character in there. Most of the characters from The Tempest are in there as well. The witches from Macbeth play quite a prominent role in it. Double Double Toil pulls more heavily from A Midsummer Night's Dream. So we see Puck, we see, those of you who know the play, we see Nick Bottom, I almost said Longbottom, wrong series. We see Titania and Oberon. We also see Caliban from The Tempest, and Ophelia makes her way into this one as well. I'm going to read the first chapter. Actually, I'm going to begin with some of William Shakespeare's words first. And then I'm going to read the first chapter, which is edited for spoilers. So if you're sitting there and you think, wow, that transition between those paragraphs was a little bit weird, that's because stuff has been cut out, so I don't ruin the ending of the first book for those of you who haven't read it. But I said I'd start with a poem. So this is from Hamlet. This is actually from the first folio, which has slightly different punctuation than later editions. And it's a poem that Hamlet wrote to Ophelia. And it's in the beginning of my book because it comes up again and again throughout the book. The characters have conversations about it. And one of the reasons I wanted to include it is it's a very problematic poem. When you teach Hamlet, it has some dual meanings. So my characters kind of talk it out. When you read my book, it is accurate according to scholarly research. So if you are studying this in school, or if you're studying Hamlet in school, you can go ahead and read this and then impress your teachers with the knowledge that you learn. So the poem is, doubt thou, the stars are fire, doubt that the sun doth move, doubt truth to be a liar, but never doubt I love. And that's the first folio from 1623. So I'm going to begin my first chapter. The first chapter of Cauldron's Bubble was called Midwinter Night's Dream. This one is called Midsummer Night's Dream. Oh, and I should say too, my heroine from this story is named Ulda. She's my original character. The dual protagonist is a young man named Dren, who we will not be seeing in this excerpt, but he plays a big role in Cauldron's Bubble. So, Alda hesitated on the rickety footbridge and looked toward the darkening east. The electric lights on the distant resort island twinkled in the dusk, like fairies through the summer leaves. It was the start of the shortest night of the year. And though the day had been long, Alda still had more to do. Too much to do, always, and never enough time. 6 months had passed. 6 months since she had been returned to her home in Grand Ledge on the 7th Island, trapped in this time and this place without a Cauldron's Bubble. Alone. Alda wiped her eyes and cleared her mind, as she had so many times before. Once inside her cottage, she felt some relief, purpose. She dropped the basket onto the kitchen table and lit the gas lamp. Shadows of green and pink fell across the single room. Her grandmother's recipe for a new Cauldron's Bubble was still propped by the garden window, silhouetted in the rising moonlight. Cans that once held the preserves that sustained her through the cold spring months now contained various ingredients: dried salamander, toadstools, herbs, wildflowers. This collection reassured Alda of all she had accomplished since she had returned to her own place and time, been forced to return. Alda pushed her thin maroon sleeve as she reached into the basket. The cuff fell again to her wrist as she rolled it up instead. Her body still felt foreign, different, and her old clothes that she had worn before she had spent forgotten years in Netherfeld were too small. She instead wore her grandmother's dresses, outdated, threadbare calico fabric, but all she had. Half a year ago, when the witches sent her away from their moor and back to her cottage, they had tried to erase her memory, to undo her mind's remnants of the talking birds, the nymphs in the stream, the bright spirits that shot from her fingertips on Prospero's island. But their spell did not fully work. Her memories of the witches remained, and they haunted her. Yet the years she spent in Netherfeld before she had tasted from Prospero's enchanted fountain were still a void. Alda shook her head, her ink-colored hair brushing against her cheeks. She had to be here, now, in the present. There would be time for the past, later. Now, she had to focus. Gently, she removed a purple flower from her basket. It was conical, like a calla lily with its head folded over, almost bowing, a jack in the pulpit. These flowers were scarce in the forest along the ledge path, and even the few she had found were either green or veined. Grandma's recipe called for a purple one, and Alda found it, today, finally, on the summer solstice. For a moment, Alda let her mind wander. She remembered a walk with her grandmother many years ago through the oak forest on the far side of the river, above the sandstone ledges that stretched the riverbank below. There, beneath the canopy of ancient trees, they had gathered pansies and daisies and Queen Anne's lace until Alda, who was still young and innocent, stooped toward a jack in the pulpit. No, not that flower. Why not? Little Alda started to reach for it again before Grandma could answer, so the older woman took her hand and led her away. That is a jack in the pulpit, and it's not a flower, not truly. It used to be a man, a preacher, who tried to drive out what he called heathen magic. What's heathen? After a moment of hesitation, Grandma explained, ancient and mysterious. She glanced at Alda, saw that the answer was sufficient, and continued. The Queen of Fairies overheard his sermon, so she turned him into a flower to ensure he never spoke again. Alda was instantly enchanted by the Fairy Queen, so different from the entrapped princesses of her other childhood tales. She asked dozens of questions as they walked back to the cottage, but her grandmother refused to tell more. But later that month, Alda discovered a tattered book under her bed, a picture book with intricate illustrations of tiny people and their adventures, tales of lost realms and secret portals. Alda did not ask her grandmother about the sudden appearance of the fairy book, and eventually, as years passed and she grew, Alda stopped asking about fairies. Now, so many years later, Alda knew the purple flower was just that, a flower. It was not a man who displeased fairies. But it was more than that, too. The jack in the pulpit was the final ingredient for the Cauldron's Bubble, the key that had eluded her throughout the icy winter and pale spring. So Alda retrieved her cast iron pot and held the recipe card to the glow of the gas lamp as she placed each ingredient into the bowl. She hesitated. If this did not work, if something went wrong, she did not know how long it would take to find another purple flower. She tapped her fingers as she considered. Finally, she tore the jack in the pulpit in half and dropped part of it into the mixture. Nothing, no reaction, no puff of smoke or fiery spark. So Alda waited and counted 10 heartbeats. Nothing changed. More waiting, and her heartbeat quickened. Something was wrong, but what? Alda took a wooden spoon from a hook near the sink and stirred. She muddled the parts until they were broken down into a kind of powder. Still nothing. Perhaps they needed to be fused somehow, combined. So Alda dropped water into the bowl until it was a paste. Again, nothing. What had she expected? Some magical metamorphosis? A sudden, furious reaction that created the sphere? Alda bit her lip and thought. Maybe she needed sunlight. Maybe the spell would only work during the day. Yes, Alda decided, she should wait until morning. So she crossed the chair next to the empty hearth. Even though she was exhausted now, she could not rest, not completely. Sleep had been elusive these 6 months. She feared what dreams may come. She retrieved Prospero's miniature book from the table at her side, the tiny volume that she had found tucked within the dead man's robes. Perhaps it could tell her a way to finish the spell, to make the cauldrons bubble. If only she could read its incomprehensible language. Now, as the moon shone directly through her kitchen window, she sat by the empty fireplace and lit a single wax candle to examine the book. Its pages were strange. Mismatched words, spots and shapes of ink, blanks of white, scattered scribbles, and unknown letters. Cross-hatching, spaces, nonsense. But she had them nearly memorized after so many months of study. She had to make sense of them, to understand. She turned the pages again and tilted the book, her fingers running over its surface. Surely, she hoped, she had missed something. Surely she could find something tonight. Surely, if she continued, hopeful and focused and uninterrupted for hours, and suddenly Alda was elsewhere. She had felt no movement, no warm sensation as she had when she traveled with the cauldron's bubble, yet she was back on the ship with the boy, with Dreng, in the hold with his blood dripping onto her hands. She wanted to save him, but she was frozen. She could not move. She forced her body into motion, her limbs heavy, but she could not stop his blood. She could not save him again. Alda did not realize she was asleep. The Dreng was only a dream, until she awoke to a long, lingering scream that pierced the silence of the night. An owl, a nighthawk, a lynx? Alda wondered, what could have screamed? She feared it was a person. Or was it Alda's imagination? Yes, she decided, her vivid dream seemingly come to life. Her sleep had been short and shallow, so the scream must have appeared to materialize into reality. The scream was her, or rather, her imagination. She relaxed, but then it happened again, louder and sharper, a real scream, high, a scream of fear, and Alda was afraid. She clumsily stood, dropping Prospero's miniature book, her fingers shaking as she awkwardly bent and replaced it on the table by the fireplace. She straightened and stared at the door of her cottage, waiting. A third scream, louder. Was it closer? Alda ran to the door, holding it shut with all of her strength. She expected it to burst open at any moment, the weight of some unseen force bearing down upon her, a fearful, unknown something about to destroy her. But then there was silence, minutes of silence. The cottage grew darker as the moon passed overhead, its beams no longer breaking through the windows. Alda counted her heartbeats. Once they slowed, she stepped away from the door. Nothing happened. She hesitated as she reached for the doorknob, but set her jaw and forced her shaking hand forward. As soon as her fingers encircled the iron handle, she swung the door open, hoping to shock whatever was waiting. Outside, all was calm, silent, the smell of midnight dew on leaves, the moonbeams flickering through oaks shining from almost directly above, the distant resort dark, its electric lights extinguished in the midnight hour, the grand river, its waters moving, or unmoving and unmoved. No breeze, no noise, no fireflies, nothing. It was not natural. Alda knew she could not remain in the cottage, fearful and confined, so she summoned all her courage, screwing it into her heart until it stuck, and slowly walked across the bridge, her hands trembling. She reached a fork in the trail and listened. To her left was the city and civilization. To her right, the railroad bridge and Sandstone Creek, and beyond that, the forest where the spiritualists had pitched their camp. Earlier that week, Alda had seen them through the trees as she stood on the outcropping above the creek. The spiritualists sang and chanted and played with cards and divination. But Alda knew they were not magical, not like her grandmother. Still, the spiritualists had what seemed to be rituals, some of which could be dangerous. Perhaps one of them had screamed, or caused someone to scream. So Alda turned to the right. After a few moments, the moon disappeared behind a cloud. She stopped, waiting for its light to return. When it finally broke through, Alda could see the path as well as in daylight. Despite this illumination, everything seemed different in the moonlight, shimmering shades and exaggerated shadows. Above the ledge path, uphill from the river, were two boulders. They looked familiar, but Alda knew she had never seen them before. Why did she recognize them? Then she remembered the stream of consciousness, the nymph's enchanted dwelling place on Prospero's island. This had all been in her vision. 2 enormous stones, low-growing ferns, and trees bent into the shape of a tunnel. Why had she not noticed this path before? Had it existed before now? Did it even exist now? Without hesitation, before Alda succumbed to worry or fear, she clambered up the rise in between the boulders. The trees continued to bend above her head, leading her forward and preventing her from turning off the path. The ferns before her cleared. The way became covered in grasses and budded wildflowers until, finally, it terminated in a wall of close-growing trees. At this dead end was a circle, a perfectly formed ring of blooming, light blue forget-me-nots. The dainty flowers glowed, almost fluoresced in the moonlight. A beam pierced the center of the ring like a spotlight and illuminated the exposed sandstone to a brilliant white. Alda cautiously approached the flowered ring and knelt to the ground, tucking her faded maroon skirt beneath her knees as she examined the unnatural foliage. She reached out, her fingers quivering, and tentatively touched one of the tiny buds. Something grabbed her wrist, something strong and cold and green that smelled of herbs and earth. It pulled, and she fell into the ring of flowers. And then Alda was gone, vanished. The moon again disappeared behind the clouds, and crickets finally broke the silence.